good afternoon to Eugene and to our very special guest we have on our podcast today, Sandi Adams. I did an interview recently with Sandi, but having known of Sandi's work, and Sandi flew over to Ireland for our Think Local conference 3 years ago, I realized it would be beneficial for us to interview Sandi because she really is the expert in this particular area with Agenda 2030 and beyond. So for people listening, some people may know of Agenda 2030, some may not. So this will be an interview where we will try to break it down into the most simplest of terms. And then on part 2 of the interview, we'll link in more to how it affects Ireland directly, how Ireland is sort of the laboratory empire for this. But I'll turn it over to Sandi if you just give us an introduction and also maybe a little bit about what started you on this path.
Sure. Thanks so much, Jana and Eugene. I mean, it's really great to have this chat. I think it's a really needed chat because so many people don't understand what Agenda 2030 is, or they think it's a conspiracy theory, or they think it's I don't know what they think it is, or maybe they don't even think about it. So, but Agenda 2030 is something that's going to really affect all of us, and is already affecting all of us. And I think we can't overlook it. Now, Agenda 2030 is just a date. It started off as Agenda 21, and Agenda 21 was birthed, if you like, at the Earth Summit in 1992 in Rio de Janeiro harbour, where they had a big conference. It was the UN. It was the UN Earth Summit 1992, and they launched Agenda 21, which was the agenda for the 21st century, and it was. They managed to. It had been a long-term plan. I mean, I can go into very briefly how it arrived at 1992, because there was a lot went on before then. But in 1992, they managed to convince 178 or 179 leaders of countries to sign up to Agenda 21. These leaders, these heads of state, every single country in the world, thought they were signing up to save the planet. But they weren't. They were signing up to global governance, and I'm pretty sure they still don't realise what they did, because the people that organised the Earth Summit were mainly oil billionaires, bankers, big movers and shakers. Maurice Strong was the chairman of he was the Secretary General, of the United Nations at the time, and he was an oil billionaire, banker, had worked for the Rockefellers for 17 years in their asset management department, and he was a billionaire in his own right. And there were people like Al Gore, President Obama, the Rockefellers, Edmund de Rothschild was there. David Rockefeller was there. And so what happened there was they sealed the fate of the whole of the world in controlling the resources of the whole of the world, and taking everything away from the people and putting it into the hands of public-private partnerships, private corporations, big pharma, everything happened there. I think it was September 1992. Now, prior to that, this had been a dream of Elon Musk's grandfather, Joshua Haldeman, and a few people who had been members of the Club of Rome in the Technocracy movement of the 1930s. And that was a climate similar to now, where people were fed up with politicians and bankers, and it was post Depression, and there were a bunch of political scientists who wanted to promote a technocracy movement and get away from a price-based economy and turn it into a carbon-based economy. And they had this whole sort of plan to turn our economy over to a carbon-based economy. And they held big rallies, and they had a big push for this. And it went on from, I think it was about 1930 to 1947. And they failed. By 1947, they had failed to get the whole world to agree to global communism, because people weren't ready then to give up capitalism, because it was post-war, and they just weren't ready for it. And what happened was the last pull on it was Joshua Haldeman, this is Elon Musk's grandfather, held a big convoy of cars, all with the they called it Technocracy Inc. logos, and it went from California to Vancouver, and they stopped at every Masonic temple on the way to promote this what he called his social credit party. Now, that's something to get your head around, isn't it? So all of this is documented. I mean, I don't know whether Elon Musk makes a big deal about it. I don't think he does. I think he keeps quite quiet about it. But the legacy lives on. Basically, they failed, and so it didn't happen. Capitalism stayed in place, and then they held loads and loads of conferences, and they decided through the Club of Rome and the Club of Rome reports. There's one called the First Global Revolution, where they decide that climate change is the greatest idea to actually blame humanity for the state of the earth, and that they could actually unite everybody under this common threat of climate change. Well, they called it global warming then, and that's on page 115. That quote where they say, in searching to find an enemy to unite us, we found the enemy. It's humanity. This is. We became the enemy in 1991, just before the Earth Summit. That was published. So they've been working on all these Club of Rome reports to bring together Agenda 21, and there were I think I mentioned three. There were many Club of Rome reports, but there were three key ones, and one was, we'll flash these up. One was the first one really was the limits to growth, which is all about depopulation. They wanted a depopulated planet, and they wanted to say that you shouldn't be having children. There's not enough resources to go around. Blah blah blah. And then the other one was in 1997, Our Common Future, which is a very very socialist kind of, well, I'd say communist thing to transfer wealth from west to east. And that's been successfully done. I mean, we are now going into the third world in the West, and the East is rising. So, and that is all planned. And then the third one was, as I say, the First Global Revolution, just before the Earth Summit. Literally, they just got it in. And then the Earth Summit, they got everyone to sign up to global governance, having already all of those people at the Earth Summit, the organisers, the movers and shakers, they had all invested in carbon, even though they were oil billionaires. So they were trying to transfer this new economy, and so that's what it's all about. And this is why we've got big business and big banks all investing now in the green agenda, and it's all a nonsense, because it's not green at all. It's just about control and making money. So I mean, fast forward from there. Obviously, at the Earth Summit, they made 8 Millennium Goals to be achieved by 2000. Those they weren't achieved. People just forgot. People didn't get on board after the Earth Summit, so they had to have a big acceleration of it. And they did this in 2015, where President Obama flew over from the States to Rome to join Pope Francis. Pope Francis seemed to have got very involved in this. Make that of what you will. But anyway, he endorsed what they called the 17 goals of Agenda 2030. They said, we'll make a goal of 2030, and we'll make all these 17 goals. We'll push these 17 goals, and we'll accelerate it. And I think that was the final acceleration, the one that happened recently is obviously COVID, because that didn't move fast enough. So then, of course, in 2019, obviously Agenda 2030 hadn't moved, or the 17 goals hadn't moved fast enough. So Antonio Guterres and Klaus Schwab all met in Geneva, and they said we need to accelerate it further, because we haven't got what they call digital cooperation. And one of the things that they wrote into the Strategic Framework Partnership document was digital cooperation. We have to achieve that. And then literally 4 months later, we had Event 201, a tabletop exercise. What if there was a novel coronavirus that escaped from a wet market in Brazil? And that's all up, you know, that you can still find that on the web. And it was really a kind of, it was a what if, you know, this happened, how would we deal with it? And of course, that's, you know, that they then had Bill and Melinda Gates there. The same people that had been in Geneva appeared in Johns Hopkins in New York for the Event 201 tabletop exercise about the pandemic. And of course, it was a done deal. You know, it was, yes, we've got the vaccine. And that is when it got accelerated now hugely, because from that moment, all the infrastructure went in when we were literally locked up. You know, there was high fiber cable going in. There were biometrics put in supermarkets. They tried to get rid of cash. All the stuff went on to accelerate this agenda 2030, and that's where we are now. And now, of course, we've got wars now and energy crisis, and you know, that's very convenient, isn't it?
Yeah, it's always problem reaction solutions. So, you know, we're seeing a lot of the UN. You know, we know about UN migration replacement. We know that you know, removing nation borders is all part of it. And Ireland is really, really suffering with the open border crisis. Our crime, stabbings are nearly a daily thing, sexual assaults. I mean, it's just awful. And the problem is the borders, the crime, but the solution, Ireland will be the testing ground for the digital ID, as you know, and they want to roll it out by the end of 2026. Ireland is testing this digital ID, and they're saying that it's voluntary, but if it's as voluntary as the Vax Pass requiring us to go into society during the COVID, well, that's not really voluntary, that's coercion. So it'll be like slowly boiling the frog. It's voluntary now just to keep your holiday, you know, airline tickets, or your, you know, using tap when you want to make a purchase, but you can be sure that it will be used to make purchases. Your purchases will be tracked. And if you use too many carbon credits, your bank account could be switched off. I mean, that's the harsh reality.
It is shocking, isn't it? And I don't think people have fully got this, because if they did, they'd be chucking their devices away. And that's kind of what we have to do in a way. We have to find another way of living.
These are weapons, because they're weapons of the 5G, so they say, or we know what those towers are, but they're also, people are glued into these phones and they're not having human conversations and connection, which is what COVID wanted us to do. And when the COVID era happened, that's when people were stuck on their phones, locked in their houses, not talking. And now, you know, if people got off the devices and started having these conversations, well, perhaps they wouldn't be still in a slumber as to what's happening. Regarding the Agenda 2030 goals, Sandi, I saw a recent statistic that gave me a little bit of optimism, and I'd like your thoughts on it. Leo Varadkar was talking about, we were at the halfway point of Agenda 2030, and they were doing a check-in on the goals. The rest of the world, I believe, was around 12 to 13%. However, Ireland was close to 80%. So while Ireland is the testing ground and firing ahead with them, can you talk about the rest of the world being so much lower and maybe dropping and peeling back on some of these, and give maybe any insight as to what's happening?
I mean, I think that the worst take up in, you know, other than Ireland, is Scandinavia. Because they've been on this for a long time. I mean, I think the Swedish had the RFDI chips in their fingers to you know, to get on buses and stuff. Let's just go back to the Earth Summit, because after the Earth Summit, they set up the it was called ICLEI. It was the the International Committee for Local and Environmental Initiatives. That's what it stands for, ICLEI. And the ICLEI was embedded into every town council, because they brought Agenda 21, as it was then, from global to local. So it's got right into every single town council. And then, of course, with the push of the Greens, which I've got in my local town council, we've got a Green Town Council who are really pushing these 17 goals, and within our, you know, our local planning and everything. And they are absolutely for all the solar panels and and even if you point out to them, this is going to destroy farmland. If you look at the planning for farmland in our area, you'll see that actually it goes up to, I think, 2049, and by 2049 there is no farmland. It's just literally data centers, solar farms and wind farms, and rewilding and business projects for farmers, but nothing really growing, and animals to be phased out, all meat and dairy to be phased out. So I think the problem is that they're not being challenged, and we can challenge all of this. And I think that's it. It's just got into our town councils, and this is how they did it. They did it through ICLEI. And now they just call it sustainable development, where they call it resilience. They've changed all the words. They don't call it ICLEI anymore. And they've got resilience kind of committees and climate change committees, and they're pushing it the whole time. And even the other day we had we've just managed through our residents association, I'll talk about this later, we've managed to bat off a World Heritage bid for my town, Glastonbury, because it's quite a historic town. And the guy that came to do the pitch had on his screen the 17 goals, and he'd already said, "Oh, we're nothing to do with the UN." And I said, "But you're UNESCO. Do you not know who you're working for?" And he said, "Yes, but nothing to do with the 17 goals." And he's got them up there on the screen. And I said, "Well, that's the proof." But they don't. They're just not.
No.
Joining the dots,
Just to touch on what Ireland, for anyone here listening in Ireland, we have a lot of data centers. And just to give you, Sandy, some numbers, and for our listeners in Ireland, so far we have 82 operational data centers in Ireland, mostly in the greater Dublin area. 14 are currently under construction, and there's 40 more that have planning. And we have a problem with our power grid, and we could run out. And these data centers consume about 22% of our metered electricity. And in Ireland, we have the highest electricity costs in Europe. So we're getting no benefit from these data centers. They're sucking our grid dry. And then regarding solar farms, some pretty astonishing facts on solar farms is in Ireland right now, we have, I've just got some quotes up here. We have it's estimated that about 5,000 to 6,000 acres are occupied by these solar farms, and Ireland's a very small island. So nearly over 6,000 acres are being occupied by solar farms. Our 2030 target is 8 gigawatts. GW, I'm assuming, is gigawatts. Is that how they measure it? Yeah. Gigawatts of solar capacity. So what that means is that the target would require about 17,400 acres. So 3 times as many solar farms as we have now to hit the 2030 target. But the question is, all these solar farms, if we have the highest electricity in Europe, we're paying for the infrastructure, but we're not getting anything back. It's simply covering agriculture land. I don't know in England if it's the same as in Ireland, but I was looking on an agriculture site, and farmers were being offered 1,200 euros per acre to lease to the solar farms. So if I'm a cattle farmer who's struggling to make ends meet, I'm working around the clock, and someone comes and says, "You've got 500 acres, we will rent that out at 1,200 an acre." The solar farm becomes much more lucrative than food production. Are you seeing the same sort of bribery to farmers in England?
Absolutely. The thing is that the renewable energy doesn't actually create enough energy to fulfill the grid anyway, and it's a con. It's an absolute con. And we all know. I remember going to the Department of Energy in London at one point and speaking to people that. It was a conference, people that actually create energy, and there was one company, and it was called Red Frog or Green Frog, I think, and they actually have diesel generators buried underneath the land in the UK, and they sell energy to the grid because the grid, even with the national grid in winter, still needs backup of diesel generators underneath the ground. And I just thought, this is crazy. And if we stop using fossil fuels and only rely on renewable, because it won't work at all, because it's a fraction. Renewables are a fraction of the grid, a fraction, literally a tiny sliver if you look at a pie chart. And so what is the reason for having them then, other than destroying the farmland and making lots of money for farmers, and encouraging them to sell their land or put these on their land by destroying the farming through all the regulations they've done? It's the only way some farmers can survive, is by going along with this nonsense. But if they saw the bigger picture, they'd see that actually they're destroying the food security for the whole country, and that is what it's meant to do.
Yeah, and the wind farms in Ireland, just on those, we talked about the solar, but the wind farms are about 2,500 acres of land for the wind farms. Now, you may help us understand as well, those solar panels that are covering all the green farmland. I read something, and I haven't fact checked it, but when they start to age and they leak and all the metals and stuff come out, when they have to be thrown out or buried in the ground, the farmland they covered does have chemicals in it. Is that right?
It does. I mean, it puts the land out of production for 30 to 40 years because of the leaching of the chemicals. And that happens with the solar farms as well as the wind farms. Also, the solar farms, the wind farms take up massive amounts of concrete. You can't destroy those things. They have to be buried. And the solar ones, if they, I mean, you could get, for instance, if you had a weather event where you had hailstones, if they shatter, all the chemicals, the lithium, the cadmium, all the chemicals that they use in them leach into the ground, and again put it out of action for 30 to 40 years. So, and a lot of people say, oh, well, why don't they have the animals grazing around the solar panels? Well, they can't because of insurance. If the animals nibble the wires, they're not insured. So you cannot mix.
So it really stops food production. And, you know, regarding if it was a green energy plan, they're covering our farmland in Ireland, which is some of the most fertile, beautiful grass in the land for cows to be grass-fed beef and free-range hens and sheep and everything else. They're covering the farmland, but then if we want to eat meat, we have to fly it in on a plane. Well, for anyone who's down the green agenda, that flying wouldn't be considered green in their eyes. So it really is so contradictory. I'm surprised that people can't see through it. But I think it's all the optics is, you know, these sustainable development goals, they've carefully planted these big 17 colorful boxes in the local parks, in the bee garden, and it will say the bee pollination garden, and there's your goals. So people actually link it to a clean earth, clean water, and biodiversity, when actually it's destroying all of those things. So I'm not sure how we break it down for people, how to simplify what these goals really mean, and that they aren't really green, they're destructive, and it's control, and it's affecting every aspect of life on earth. How do you suggest breaking it down for people who still think it's a conspiracy or think it's a good thing?
Yeah, I mean, I took each goal, actually on my website, I've done a breakdown of the real meaning, because every goal sounds really sugar-coated and fabulous. And yet, actually, when you break it down and look at it, it's an inversion of what it really means. And it is all tied up with digital, the whole digital world, and the whole, the economy, the green economy. And really, it's all about control. And I mean, I can read a few of them, if you like, of what the real meanings are, because, you know, no poverty is creating dependency on systems and aid. You know, it really is, it's almost like making everybody equally poor. You create UBI, universal basic income, and you make everybody dependent on the state. And that's what we're seeing now, because if you're dependent on the state, digital ID works perfectly for them, because everything is linked to the money that you're receiving from the state. And if you put a step wrong, if you in any way speak out against that, they can cut you off. And that's really what and the poverty thing is it's a trap. They're saying, but actually they're saying, they're going to end poverty. Actually, it's going to create more poverty. So it is an inversion. of that goal, because
it's pushing the middle class right down to the poverty level. So you're going to have the elites at the top, the people flying their private jets to Davos to eat filet beef and caviar, and then you have everyone else at the bottom relying on the government to put breadcrumbs on the table. But they'll get rid of everybody in the middle. And on part 2 of our discussion, we'll break down all 17. So that's a great introduction with the poverty one, and showing how inverted it is and how deceptive it is. So I look forward to going through all 17. And Sandi, just let everyone know your website, which we'll also put in the link so people can reference and do their own research.
Yes, my X handle is at Sandi Adams 2030, and my website is sandyadams.net. That's it. Okay. And I'm known as on YouTube. My YouTube, the name of my podcast is 2030 and Beyond with Sandi Adams. The 17 goals are heavily linked with stakeholder capitalism, because it's about moving away from it's about centralizing the whole economy through a centralized banking system. And stakeholder capitalism is really, it's the what would I call it? It's the, in a way, it's the thesis and antithesis kind of problem, reaction, solution thing. And what they do is that they've put the stakeholder capitalism is really about bringing all of the biometrics and everything together to control the economy. And there'll be a very, I mean, it's simple, like things like BlackRock are buying up all the land and all the property. And stakeholder capitalism is very different from what we know as normal capitalism. It's, normal capitalism is price based. This, they want to base it on a global economy based on carbon, and I don't know how this is going to transfer, but I think that they have to get rid of cash first, and I don't really know how they'll do that, to get rid of cash. But Richard Jeffs has done a very good film on stakeholder capitalism and the WEF, but unfortunately he won't recognize the whole UN involvement in all of this. But I mean, he's done a brilliant job in his film. I think it's called Stakeholder Capitalism, and we could put a link into that. But he explains it very well. But really, it's the WEF creating this economy where you take people out of the picture and put robots in, and you then have the way they sell it is that you've got this the population of people with more time on their hands, and look at the wonderful things you can do. Well, you won't have any money to do these wonderful things. And it's creating this two-tier system of billionaires and poor people, basically. And it's, and you look at the way Amazon works, that is stakeholder capitalism. It's a completely centralized economy. Getting rid of small businesses is stakeholder capitalism. Getting rid of small and medium-sized businesses that's what it's all about. It's about big business, big corporations controlling and the money creation, the money supply, everything. But the small people, no, they've gone.
And we see that in Ireland. I mean, if people just open their eyes during the COVID era, everyone was ordering on Amazon, all their big home deliveries from Tesco and all the big super shops. But during the COVID, all the little shops closed down. They weren't considered, a lot of them, essential. And then all of a sudden now they went out of business because, with the economy collapsing, people didn't support them. And when you walk through the towns and villages, it's very sad, because the towns and villages which had, lovely small fruit and veg shops or craft shops or stationery shops owned by business owners or local pubs, now you have your bookies, people go to gamble. You have your mobile phone repair shops on every corner that never have anybody in them, but they somehow continue to exist. You have all of these really impersonal shops and the towns and villages have lost the fabric of the culture of Ireland, and you may be seeing the same over in the UK.
Absolutely. In the UK, you're seeing these towns that are homogenized, and they're usually pedestrianized, and you'll have the vape shops, as you say, the nail bars, all these really awful kind of, you know, shops that aren't individual. And, you know, I think this is also going to get worse with the ESGs, the environmental and social governance contracts that the businesses have to abide by. They've got to abide by, you know, diversity. They've got to abide by environmental sanctions, all sorts of paperwork, which actually will lose them money. And I can see there's a lot of, and business rates, everything is against the small business, and that's by design. It's not organic, it's by design. Yeah. I don't know whether you have in Ireland the Absolute Zero document. Do you? That's probably a UK thing. I have sent it to you. And it's a roadmap to 2030. And it was put through, it was a white paper of sorts, put together by our government through universities like Cambridge and Oxford. And it was literally, how do we get to 2030? And on, I think it's page 4, there's this colourful roadmap, and it tells you literally that there will be no planes flying in or out of the UK by 2049. Wow. And no shipping in and out of the UK by 2049, and that there will be beef and dairy will be phased out between 2030 and 2049, and concrete and things like that will be going because it is too carbon unfriendly to create. And and how they'll bring in this circular economy, which is basically very, 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 very austere. You'll be put on a planetary diet, you know, which the C40 Cities initiative have put forward, a planetary diet through the now what do they call it? I think it's the Lancet, through the health. They've got into the health you know, whole health thing, and they've said, you know, you've got to have a planetary diet for your health. Well, it's not, it's just to keep us unhealthy. And in that planetary diet, you can only have, I think it's half a pint of milk a week or something silly, and a piece of cheese and a tiny 2/3 of a burger or something silly. So it goes on and on like that, this roadmap. And I found it shocking, and I thought, how on earth are they going to achieve that between 2030 and 2049? Well, what's happened recently with the energy crisis, they could stop flying planes. You know, all of it is fitting into place. It's almost like they've got their ducks in a row. So really organizing ourselves to be resilient for all of this, and having our own almost parallel, you know, sort of societies, and being able to fulfill our needs ourselves, because nobody else is going to help us. Yeah.
We really do need to kind of wake up the masses, because this will impact every aspect of our life on planet Earth. And I'm wondering, Sandi, some sign that was in Dublin recently, it said, this is your smart city starts here, or your 15-minute city starts here. And I know you've done a real deep dive into the 15-minute cities and the smart cities. I'm wondering if you could talk about those. What is a 15-minute city? What is a smart city? Are they different? What does it mean for someone who is living in one of these?
Yeah, well, my deep dive went into smart cities really when I was looking at it quite deeply in 2014. And my wake-up call was seeing Rosa Koire's work. Do you remember Rosa Koire? Yeah, she was amazing, and sadly she's not with us anymore. But she woke me up to Agenda 21, the agenda for the 21st century. And that's when I started talking openly about it in the UK, because I read her book in 2011, I think it was. And I'd also, weirdly, what woke me up also is that I was in the corporate world, and I did an installation for Microsoft, and Bill Gates came to see it. He flew over from the States, and it was a mini smart city. It was a London square that was all interconnected. Oh. And my alarm bells went off then. But then I read Rosa's book, and she, on one of her talks, she showed this map of North America, and it was color coded in red and yellow, and that most of it was red and yellow. That was where the humans couldn't be, and it was only military and federal use. They were like buffer zones. They called them buffer zones. And then there were the little dots, which were the smart cities, and there were some pink ones for the Indian reservations and North American Indian reservations. But mainly it was just little dots where and these buffer zones in between. And I thought, this is horrendous. I can't believe that that's a plan. And it was put that the chap that created that was David Foreman of Earth First. And he's again another radical left crazy green who put that together in 1991, I think, or 1992, I can't remember. But anyway, that was a big shock. And so I followed Rosa. And then she was talking about smart cities. And then I looked into smart cities in the UK and realized that there was actually a smart city index, and there were 7 towns in England, cities in England that were designated to be smart cities. And Bristol, one of my local cities, was the flagship smart city, or deemed to be the flagship smart city of Europe. And I did a big deep dive into what was being put into Bristol, and they'd got projections of what it would be. Now, those I'm pretty sure haven't been achieved. And what happened is that the Smart City Index kind of got lost because the agenda didn't move fast enough. And what I found is that what I believe happened is that there are smart cities. I mean, you've got Manchester, Glasgow, London, Liverpool, all those big cities are smart cities, and they've got the infrastructure there. They've got the Internet of Things, the Internet of Bodies, the big RFDI mesh over them that controls everything, and everything's interconnected, and the transport and everything move together. What I think they did is they realized they couldn't fulfill this big agenda of every big city, and what they did then was they thought, we'll just lock them up where they are. And that's when the 15-minute city, because there wasn't a long-term plan for the 15-minute cities, they just suddenly appeared, and they appeared out of the C40 cities document. And I think it was a new approach to just literally get the smaller towns quicker onto this agenda. And it means then that you can't, they divide the city up into zones where you cannot move in between zones, and you have to there's there is facial recognition, but there's number plate recognition, and so everything that you do is accessible within 15 minutes. And they have these in China. And it is a way of they say of containing and maintaining the energy flow and the people flow, and to literally control every zone, and you're not allowed to move in between. And it caused masses of problems in places like Oxford and Cambridge, where people were forced to go on a ring road on the outside. It was polluting the city, and people couldn't get from A to B, whether you were taking your children to school or seeing your aged mother the other side of town. It didn't work, and they wanted everyone to rely on transport, which doesn't work properly. So yeah, what were you going to say? You were going to mention
so the 15-minute city. I know there's some in Ireland that very much feel like it. You can go down the bike path, and there's all the food shops, hair salons, nail bars, everything in one little hub. And people think it's convenient. So for anyone listening who thinks that, well, that's really convenient, I actually like to be 15 minutes to the pub or the restaurant or the, hair salon. Talk about the risks of what it really means to live in this 15-minute city or smart city. Why would that be bad for anyone listening who might think it's all about convenience and that?
Well, I see it as it keeps people contained, and there's, at any point they can say, right, we're going to have a lockdown of because there's, there's not enough energy, or or it's a climate that they'll impose climate. They've talked about climate lockdowns, where they literally lock down the zones, and in certain zones you can't access certain things on one day, and another day they can just literally close down different zones or close them.
How do they close them down, Sandi? Are there physical barriers, or are there cameras that will send you a ticket? Or
there's cameras, and they've got barriers as well. They've got these barriers that come up from the ground. There's geofencing, which not many people understand, that most modern cars are fitted with geofencing, so the government at any point can switch off from a central somewhere, the ability to drive your car. Now that came out when there's a chap here in England called Jeff Buys Cars, and he does his own podcast. He's a car dealer, and he said that he, you know, one of his people, his customers, went to have his car, his smart car, you know, one of those electric cars, hybrid or whatever, put into a service. And what happened was when he collected it, they said, "Oh, we've given you a digital upgrade." And he went, "Oh, thanks." Didn't know what it was. And when he looked at the small print, it said that your car can be stopped by the government if there is a national emergency.
Oh my goodness.
They can disable your car.
They are telling you as a free sovereign human being, they're telling you where you can go, when you can go, how frequently you can go. Whereas our God-given right should be freedom of movement wherever we want to go, whenever we want, however we want, within, of course, you know, making sure we're not harming people. So it's really astonishing to think that anyone, once they heard about these 15-minute cities, smart cities, anyone would think that it's a good thing and it's all about just being able to pop out and get your hair cut down the road. They don't see the negativities.
Yeah, I think in places like Oxford, you're given 100 days where you can leave your zone. Just 100 days, a year, which is crazy.
Twice a week, only twice a week you can leave your little zone. So you're just herded like cattle into your cattle grids.
I mean, can you imagine if you've got children and their school is the other side of town, because that's your choice, and you have to go, it's pouring with rain and you've got 2 or 3 children to put on a bus and it takes forever and you've got to get to work. I mean, how do you deal with that, you know? Yeah.
And have any places that put in this infrastructure had to scrap it because either it didn't work or people just rebelled, or did anyone reverse it in any parts of the
there is a win, and I keep talking about this because I think our power is in not individuals challenging their councils, but a body of people. And if you form a residents association, you can challenge your council on things like 15-minute cities or LTNs, low traffic neighbourhoods, or even data centres. That's sort of the solar panel farms, the wind farms, and there was it was last summer, a borough in London, the London borough of Lambeth. It was. There's a place called West Dulwich, and they challenged an LTN, a low traffic neighbourhood that had been put in literally overnight. It was in place. They had number plate recognition. People were being fined because they put this low traffic neighbourhood in where you were restricted on certain roads. The bollards got put in. All of this happens often overnight. Literally, no proper consultation. And they said that they had objected to it, and the document had been ignored by the council, but they managed to challenge it. They didn't even know to go to judicial review, and they won because it hadn't gone through due process in the consultation phase. So it was interesting because the Lambeth Council had to pay their fees, their court fees. They had to take out all the infrastructure, every single sign, road, painted on the road, every single camera had to come down. They had to refund all the fines to people that had been fined, and that was just scrapped overnight. Now that could be used, and they used something called the gunning principles, and there's only 4 of them, and I will get those flagged up for you, Eugene, because these gunning principles are really, really powerful. And they can overturn anything that hasn't been done with due consultation of the people. Yeah. So that's a real win. And I think if more people knew about all of that, I'm going to try and get an interview with the people from the Residents Association at West Dulwich, because I think everyone needs to know how they did it and what they did, because it worked. Whatever it was amazing. Yeah. Now the World Economic Forum, they're the way of bringing this into the political arena and the financial arena. You're absolutely right. And they've done it. I mean, Klaus Schwab they've done a fantastic job, and also embedding climate change into every decision making process. They created the frameworks. The World Economic Forum create all the frameworks for all of this to be implemented at a government, local level in our politics, and they're very clever, because all of it is actually not in hard law. Most of it's in soft law, but it's all it's all put into place, and suddenly you find that it's happening, and it's almost as though it's very, the way they've done it is almost in a kind of rather beguiling, awful way, because it's done on guilt tripping people about climate change, and that's the vector they've used. And it's very interesting that now the IPCC have just said, they've just announced that climate change, we've all the 20 years of climate change information that they've put out hasn't been accurate. They've admitted that. And I thought, well, how can they admit that after all this time? How are we still going along with it? And Tony Blair at the last COP conference said, we don't need climate change anymore because we've got AI. So there you go. That's all it was ever for. It was
Do you
never
think they're dropping that agenda, Sandi, just to let all the data centers come in, which suck the grid out of power?
Exactly.
I mean, they can't have climate crisis and then have data centers, because
they've
that would
got
be
to
so
divide the
contradictory.
two. Yes,
that's
exactly.
right. Thank you so much, Sandi, for your insight and information.